Hello, and welcome to tonight's Fall for the Book discussion with prolific author and Renaissance man Jo Nesbø. I'm Jacqueline Hess, president of George Mason Friends. We're an Annandale, Virginia-based nonprofit that supports George Mason Regional Library and libraries and literacy programs throughout Fairfax, Virginia. We've been happy to support Fall for the Book for many years and are very pleased this year to support this session with Jo Nesbø, who's a favorite among our members. Mr. Nesbø is a musician, a songwriter, an economist, and a #1 New York Times bestselling author. He has won the Raymond Chandler Award for Lifetime Achievement, as well as many other awards. His books have sold 45 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 50 languages. His Harry Hole novels include The Redeemer, The Snowman, The Leopard, Phantom, and most recently, Knife. He is also the author of The Sun, Headhunters, Macbeth, and several children's books. Mr. Nesbø lives in Oslo, Norway. He will be joined this evening by K.E. Semmel, a former National Endowment for the Arts Translation Fellow. Mr. Semmel has translated more than a dozen novels from Danish and Norwegian, and he has interesting insights into the authors with whom he works. Enjoy.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks to the George Mason Friends for sponsoring tonight's event. You've sold millions of books in your native Norway, and you're wildly popular there. How differently or not do U.S. readers read your work?
My impression is that it's that they read it more or less in the same way. It's, for me, it's fascinating how the character Harry Hole has sort of traveled across borders, and also my standalone novels that they I think that I don't know if that would have been the case like 50 years ago. I feel like in the last 50 years people are sort of getting used to reading international literature, seeing international movies. I think that basically also, the Harry Hole character and my other characters are also inspired by and influenced by international fiction and movies. And also, my father was American, so maybe that's the reason. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and he would bring American literature to the house when I was young. So I sort of grew up with Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. So it may be that there's a stronger American influence in my writing than in most Scandinavians' writing. I don't know.
Speaking of Scandinavian, so Scandinavian crime fiction is extremely popular in the US and really around the world. What do you suppose it is about Scandinavian crime novels that American readers, English language readers, what is it that readers are drawn to?
Again, I have no idea. I get that question a lot, and I try to give an impression of an insightful, intelligent answer to that. But what I usually say is that it's probably because in the 70s there were two Swedish writers, Sjöwall and Wahlöö, who sort of brought the pulp fiction version of crime literature in Scandinavia from the kiosks and into the serious bookstores, and that they sort of made the genre interesting for young, talented writers, that they could use that genre as a vehicle for their storytelling talents. While in other countries, it was considered lowbrow. Crime literature in Scandinavia is, if not considered highbrow, then at least you would have actually a lot of the highbrow, so-called highbrow writers at one time or another having a shot at the crime novel because it's fun and it's hard competition. So if you could write a good crime novel in Scandinavia, that is sort of the thing to do. So yeah, I think it's a tradition stemming back to the 70s.
Is that one of the reasons that draws you to the crime novel? That it's fun?
Yeah. Or actually what drew me to the novel to begin with was that it was possible to write a crime novel in 5 weeks. At least that was what I thought in back in '97 when I was asked, to write something. I was contacted by a publishing house, a girl I knew there. I was playing with a band that was quite popular in Norway, and they wanted me to write a book about the band. And I said, I won't do that, but I'm going to Australia for 5 weeks, so maybe I'll write something else for you. And so I figured that, okay, if I'm to write something in 5 weeks, then it will have to be a crime novel. But also, of course, I was inspired by not so much actually the Scandinavian crime fiction scene at the time, but American writers like Jim Thompson was my absolute favorite, and also graphic novels writers like Frank Miller. I was a keen reader, but not a huge reader of crime novels at the time.
Well, I want to ask you a question about translation before we get too long into this. I translate also as well from Scandinavian, primarily Danish, but the translator of this book, the new book, The Jealousy Man, is Robert Ferguson. And I wanted to ask you a question because you've been translated in over 50 languages. And I wanted to ask you specifically about your English language work. Do you have any role in the process of the translation? Do you like to see the translation after it's been submitted to the publisher? Are you completely out of the picture on that?
I'm completely out of the picture. I did for my first novel, I did read the translation, or actually I stopped after the first chapter because I realized that I could see the kind of problems you run into as a translator, translating humor, for example, wordplay, and I realized that I couldn't fix it. I couldn't do a better job. So I had to decide whether I trusted this translator or not. And if you trust him then or her, then it's better just to not saving yourself the frustration of seeing what gets lost in translation and just hoping it turns out well. Because especially when it's translated to English, as you know, for Scandinavian writers, I mean, Norwegian and Danish being small languages, when you're being published in South Korea, you can't find a Korean Norwegian translator, which happens to be really good also, or there's a very slim chance of that. So they will translate from English. So the English translation is extremely important.
And you're also a musician as well as a writer. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how music informed your writing. And vice versa, actually.
Well, I think I was always a fan of storytelling musicians, singer-songwriters, or even in bands like Tom Waits, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, and bands like Jayhawks, and especially the rock scene of the United States in the 80s with REM and Rank and File and all those Green on Red, Jason and Scorchers, all those great bands. Those were my favorites, and the lyrics did definitely influence me. And I started out as a lyricist for my friends' bands, and then later on I started my own band, and I would write songs and the lyrics for my band. So my school of story writing was actually writing 3 verses and a refrain, 3-minute pop songs for my band, and for me it was a good school because what you learn is that you you just have 3 verses and a refrain to tell a full story, then you need to trust your readers. And I think that is that's important to realize and to see, to understand that how much you can actually leave to your readers.
So I'm going to ask a couple questions about your most famous character, Harry Hole, and he's someone I find really fascinating. He's in many ways he's an archetype of the crime fiction genre. He's very much an archetype in that role of detective. He's a loner and an alcoholic, but like Sherlock Holmes, he's a kind of a savant when it comes to solving crimes. I'm particularly interested when crafting his character for each book. How do you make him new and interesting each time to kind of reinvent the archetype each time?
I think that for me, he was in many ways a fully formed character when I wrote the first novel, The Batman, which is not to say that I presented the full character, but I, when returning to that character, I always knew that there were new sides of him to explore, and it was like I didn't have to invent those sides of him. I think it's a little like as you get older. I think it's typical that especially men, I feel that we don't need and we don't want new friends. Because we just need to know the friends the few friends we already have. We need to know them better, and they become, even the most tiring old friends for some reason become more interesting as they grow older and as we grow older. I don't know why that is, but I feel the same way about Harry. That is, there's still so much to explore there, and I'm more interested in knowing and understanding him at a deeper level than superficial new friendships.
And I'm going to take a moment to insert an audience question. Somebody asked a question which I did not, and I want to ask it here of you. And that is, speaking of Harry Hole, when is the next book in the series? Like, when is the next Harry Hole novel coming?
It's in the pipeline. I can't say exactly when it's going to be published or when I'm going to write it full time. Right now, I'm playing around with ideas, or I already have the ideas, so it's just putting the story together before I start writing.
So one of the other things you do so well in your work is engaging contemporary social issues, and you do it very well in the Hole novels, but also in this recent book. And so you mentioned the bat earlier, and you do, I think, a really fantastic job and simply of describing the Aboriginal Australians, their story and how they were treated and have been treated throughout Australian history. So can you talk a little bit about how you utilize social issues to inform your writing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just realized when you say it's the title is the bat. In Norwegian, it was the Batman. When it was published in the United States, for obvious reasons, we were not allowed to call it the Batman.
Yeah.
I think for me, I really have like a political agenda. It's not like I sit down and I say that I'm going to address these and these political issues. But maybe in a novel called The Redbreast, it was I knew I was going to address political hot potato, which was the myth of all Norwegians being in the resistance movement when we were occupied by the Germans, and write about the Norwegians that actually joined the Germans and to fight, mainly to fight the Russians on the East Front, which Russia having a border toward Norway. But apart from that, it's not really there on the draft level. It more comes into the story as I start writing, and I can't really tell, why that is or how it sneaks its way in. On the other hand, I think it's impossible to write a 100% non-political novel. I mean, just in this right now, I'm in Amsterdam, and if I was to describe my drive from the airport, Schiphol, and into my hotel here, in describing Amsterdam, I would have to be political. I mean, I would have to decide what to focus on and what to leave out. And in that editing process, you are political. You can't help it. And so I guess that's what's happening in my books too, that what I find interesting and what I find what I need to comment on and address, is a political choice.
So we'll switch gears here and we'll talk about the newest book. So The Jealousy Man here, translated by Robert Ferguson. I love this collection. It's really strong. Given the success of your crime novels, I'm just wondering, did you get any pushback from your agent, editor, publisher, when you brought them a manuscript full of stories, especially stories that had nothing to do with your previous work?
Yeah, well, no, not really. I mean, they know me for a long time, and they know that they can't really order a novel or order anything really. That they get what they get, and thankfully they are, up until now, they've been happy with what I'm giving them. But I think that it's I mean, I've been writing children's books. This time it's short stories. I've been writing standalone novels and even documentary books. So it's nothing new that I'm doing something new. I don't see myself as a writer of crime novels. I'm a storyteller, like my relatives and my father. They could tell you any story and make it entertaining. Of course, I'm looking for a story that has not only value as entertainment, or depending on how you define entertainment. To me, I think that entertainment is an immensely important part of life, and it influences our real lives also. So in that respect, I'm proud to call myself a writer of entertainment. So these stories were just, the only boss I have as a writer is the ideas. And those were just the ideas I had for stories. And I realized that, okay, so these are short stories. There are a couple of them are novellas, but none of them are really novels.
And related, you kind of answered my next question, so I'm not going to ask that, but I'm going to ask a slightly related question. Just in terms of the genesis of this book, were you writing these stories over the course of several years, or were you just kind of like, oh, I'm going to write a collection of stories now, or was this something a longer process?
Some of the ideas I had for a while. And it started off with me writing Rat Island, one of the novellas, which is taking place in, seemingly it's in Los Angeles, and it's inspired by 1975 Saigon, at the roof of the American embassy. People leaving the city and trying to save themselves. And then it was Jealousy Man, which was inspired by my own climbing, actually, in a Greek island at Kalymnos. And so and also my fascination over the years of well, the human condition and jealousy as a motive and as a driving force for behavior. I had those ideas for a long time, and then when I realized that, okay, so this is going to be a collection of short stories. I wrote a collection of short stories back in 2000, which wasn't translated because it came together with a CD of music, so it was sort of a part of a bigger project. But anyway, it's I then was sort of inspired by those two novellas, and I sat down and I picked up some half-cooked ideas and some scripts I had started on but never finished. And then after a year, I had the collection. I actually a big collection of short stories. Probably there's probably another collection of short stories that wasn't published, that didn't make it to the final product.
Well, there are two parts of this new book, Jealousy and Power. Part one, Jealousy, part two, Power. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on these themes in any sort of way. Part of the reason I'm asking is if there's something that readers can take away from this book, some idea or some wisdom, what would that be?
I don't know if there's any wisdom in any of my work, really. I'm not saying that to be modest, but I think that for me, the sort of the task of a writer of fiction is not to give answers. But as a writer of fiction, you can ask some interesting questions and suggest some answers, but not really deliver much wisdom, I think, to your readers. The reason I'm fascinated with jealousy is, well, partly, of course, because I've been jealous. I don't think I'm a particularly jealous guy, but I'm fascinating with I think I'm a pretty controlled guy, and that makes it perhaps stunning when you end up in a situation where you can't control your feelings, that you're feeling and you're acting in a way you don't want to. And I think that if there's one emotion that we as humans would like to get rid of, that we can't see the point of, then it's jealousy. I mean, other feelings that may be negative, like anger, we can see that we need that, and in certain situations, we welcome anger. Anger can make us act, can make us stronger, well, jealousy, that is, if you could sort of just amputate your jealousy, I think most people would be happy with that. And the idea for the novella Jealousy Man is that it's a police investigator, a Greek detective that has this ability to smell jealousy, and since 80% in murder cases, 80% of the cases, it's the jealous husband. He's a useful man. The power section of the short story collection is inspired by several science fiction writers I read as a young man, Ray Bradbury, especially being one of them. I've been sometimes asked, why is crime fiction such a perfect genre for addressing social issues? I don't think it is. I think it's more by coincidence that crime fiction has been given, especially in Scandinavia, that mandate to address social issues. I think the genre which is suited for doing that is the science fiction genre. So I've always been drawn to that. So it's the power section of the short stories, they're sort of cut in half, are mainly science fiction stories, not meaning that there's a lot of rockets and planets, but it's still, you know, set in a fictional future or fictional present.
I just want to say I was struck by the definitely with the dystopian aspect of the second half of the collection. I really appreciated that. But I wanted to kind of ask a little bit about, I want to not forget this too, because I think this is kind of important for the storytelling here, is how do you, like, when you talk about The Jealousy Man, for example, you know, this is a short story, but it's still a detective story. And I was wondering how the size of a short story, as in here, as in The Jealousy Man, how that impacts the crime aspect. And, you know, the scope of a crime novel is broad and vast. And in terms of the short story, in terms of The Jealousy Man, say, how does that size impact the nature of the story itself and the crime, and what changes do you find yourself doing in the two different forms?
Well, first of all, I didn't sit down and say that, okay, I'm going to write a novella or I'm going to write a short story. I sat down and I had this idea for a story. And then when you finish with the story, you see that, okay, so this is 10 pages or it's 70 pages. And that's when you see what kind of animal it is. So I think that, like I said, the boss is the story. So I don't really, you know, see myself from the outside, you know, seeing, okay, so here's this guy sitting and writing a short story. So, and here's a novelist. It's just storytelling. But of course, as a writer and as a storyteller, you use tradition and you use genre. And so you are, to a certain extent at least, conscious about what you are doing. You are, because most story, all, if not all storytelling, is based on tradition. I mean, you write something which is a result of what you read. So I mean, it's so I don't really have a good answer for that. It's I would say that ideally I just write the story, but I would naive to claim that I'm not inspired by or influenced by genres and by, you know, having read Chekhov and Hemingway, you know, and sort of realizing that, okay, well, so I'm in that genre now, or in that in their arena, writing short stories.
I'm struck by the two stories that bookend the collection. So London and Black Knight. Each of these stories toys with the notion of contract killers as culturally sanctioned members of society to a degree. Black Knight is set in a dystopian future. And so the placement of these stories at the front and the back of the book don't seem like a coincidence. As Lucas would say in Black Knight, there's something more to them. Just wanted to ask you now, going back to your musical, you know, you're a musician. When you were writing these, when you were putting this book together, were you thinking in terms of a musician who's putting an album together? Are these, you know, was this kind of like putting an album together with the stories in a, you know, in order? Should readers read it in that kind of way? I'm thinking of Bob Dylan as a perfect example of this.
Yeah, or I mean, you have like Exile on Main Street, Rolling Stones. It's like a sort of a chaotic selection of songs being recorded in or south of France and some of them in the United States, and it doesn't really have a theme, but it's brilliant. And you wonder, is it coincidence? Because I'm sure if you ask members of the band, they would admit that, okay, so we didn't have like a grand plan. It was all chaos at the time. And so I think it's a combination of not setting out with a course or or that you have a destination really, but at the end you see what you got and you put it together. And sometimes you get a feeling, even as a writer, even as the creator, that okay, so there must be a sort of an invisible hand here having created this, because it does feel like it's a product, like it's something that has a logic to it, that there's a line running through the whole thing, a theme there, and it looks like a finished story. Like you said, that you start in London and then you travel around the world and you end up in Milano, and you have contract killers at the beginning and the end. So yes, I think that as a musician, I mean, you work more with a gut feeling. It's more emotions, while being a writer, especially of crime fiction, is more also a intellectual job. And so yeah, I think it's fair to compare the sort of the construction of a collection like this with music or an album.
You you mentioned you got London, Milano. You could easily write stories just set in Norway. You could make that your bread and butter, but you don't. So what I want to know, I mean, you can do this all through the Harry Holy novels as well. They go to different places, and stories involve different people from different countries. You've got the Jealousy Man is a Greek detective. So I'm just curious here, what drives you to tell someone's story, some fictional character, to create a fictional character? Is it the character itself? Is it setting? Is it some really interesting plot idea that you have in mind? What is the lead when you sit down to write a story?
It could be anything really. It could be a character. It could be a plot. It could even be a title of a novel. The Snowman, which is one of the Harry Hole novels, that started with a title. I was contacted by a friend of mine who was producer of movies, and they were working on a movie, and they told me something about the movie, and he asked me, do you have a good title for the movie, because we can't come up with a title. And I said, okay, The Snowman would be a good title. And he said, okay, but there's no snowman in the movie. And I said, the title, I think the title is so good, you should consider having a snowman in the movie. But he passed on the title, and so I used it for my own novels, just starting with the ideas that comes with that title. But I think that most of the time it's characters. I'm not a very social person, but I like to sit in taxis when I'm traveling and talk and ask questions to the taxi driver. I actually did that today here in Amsterdam. And whenever people, like sitting in a car like this, they will probably let their guard down. And when they realize that you're not asking because you have a sort of a hidden agenda, you're just curious, you want to talk to somebody, and you can ask them all those questions. And most people are then really happy to talk about themselves. And 90% of all people have interesting stories to tell. Or maybe it's just me. I'm in that way, I'm interested in people. I'm interested in their stories, what makes them tick, how they ended up, living in this city, being a taxi driver, what kind of life they want, if they have the life they want, if they want something else. All those things I find immensely entertaining and interesting. And I mean, I grew up in a storytelling family, and most of the stories were about people.
And would you say something similar to, though, because kind of its framework for many of your stories is some heavy research, I would say. Take, for example, the cicadas in The Jealousy Man. You have a lot of physics in there. We're talking string theory. There's a really interesting thing in terms of time or space travel, however you want to define that, in terms of shifting from one dimension to another. So how do you balance that, like the dystopian fiction that you are writing in some of these stories? How do you balance the character development with that kind of research that allows you to create their story?
Well, I don't know if I if I have the right balance all the time. You know, it's I'm interested in things. You know, I'm curious about stuff, but it's not like I write a story so that I can like show off my research, or hopefully it doesn't feel like I do that. It is definitely not my intention. But sometimes when I'm reading about something, I get interested and I research some more, and then out of that grows a story, an idea for a story, because it is like you mentioned, time travels, and the idea, the not so far-fetched idea that there are a endless number of parallel universes. You know, that idea that this conversation that you and I are having now in parallel universes, there's an endless version of the same conversation, just with one word pronounced differently. I find that fascinating, incomprehensible in a way, but that just makes it more fascinating. And out of that, there's this story that, okay, so can you move from one universe to a parallel universe? Then you will have time travel, and then you can change reality, which is, you know, which sounds like disaster, but there is a number of universes where you do have that kind of disaster, where you have time paradoxes and universes collapsing. That is, if you accept the idea of an endless number, an infinite number of parallel universes, you will have that too.
Will we see more of the dystopian work that you especially in the second half of the book, where you really get into some of these things? Will we see more of that in your future work?
I don't know. I try not to reveal too much of my plans. Actually, there's not much to reveal. I don't have that many plans. It's I go more from one book to the next book. I'm pretty productive. I mean, I prolific, isn't that the English word? But that is because I have a lot of ideas, and I'm afraid that, you know, I will sort of lose the ideas if I don't sit down and write them right away. But that also means that I have no idea what I'm going to write next year. I do like the science fiction genre, but right now I'm keen to return to Harry Hole and dive into his dark universe again.
We do have another question from the audience, and I wanted to share it and maybe make it the conclusion question. Would you like to see more, or your work actually, you know, Harry, for example, become in films? Would you like to see more of that or less of that? Or how do you feel about film and and your work?
Well, right now I'm privileged because there are so many of my stories being worked on for movies, even being shot or being in an earlier phase of development. And I'm thrilled because not because I would want to see my stories on the screen, but because my material can be used as input for what can hopefully be good movies. I'm not offended if there's movies that aren't true to my story. I don't see it that way. I mean, the book is there. I've written a novel. I've done my job. If a talented film director, if he or she can use that for a good movie, I'm just thrilled. Then again, of course, there are so many attempts at making movies, and I don't know. I would guess that for every good movie and movie that we see in the cinema, there are 5 or 6 really bad movies. So of course the percentage chance that it will be a good movie is quite slim. But if during my lifetime there will be one really good movie made out of my books, I'd be happy. Actually, there's already been 1 or 2.
Well,
but
would you would you be interested in being, testing your writing muscles and actually writing the screenplay for one of those?
Oh yeah, well, I'm actually working on that now. I've been working on a TV series, and I've been involved in a couple of TV series. So I've done a little writing for the screen also.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm very appreciative of your time today, and I also want to thank George Mason as well. And remember that you can click the green button on the video below the video to purchase The Jealousy Man, which I highly recommend. It's a very fun collection of stories. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Carl.